Hey everybody, welcome to our Wealth and Health channel. Super excited to have Stephen Nash and Derek Staples back with us again, and we are going to be talking about some pretty crazy stuff that's going to be coming up, some regulations that are going to be happening in July, and Stephen and Derek are going to be here to talk about it. Stephen's got 22 years in the finance, and Derek's in real estate investor, and in the crypto space. Stephen also, everybody's doing real estate these days, but anyways, we've got some experts with us, so we're going to talk a little bit about that and hopefully get some questions answered. So my first question is, what's going to happen? It's kind of scary. Like, what's going to happen in July? I've been hearing so many things, and I don't even really know what to believe and what's real and what's really happening. So, Derek,
Well, I think before we talk about July, maybe Steve can share with us a little bit of the history of money,
yeah, that's a good one.
and what happened in 1971 that really changed the way. Because I know on our Constitution, our currency was supposed to be backed by gold, right? It was supposed to be a gold-backed currency,
Yeah.
Steve. So maybe you can share that with us first, and then we can talk a little bit about what happened almost 2 years ago, July 9th, 2021, with the executive order that Joe Biden signed and where that's going to be taking us here in the future.
Yeah. No, that's 71, you see, Nixon actually ended the gold standard in 71. But if you you backtrack a little bit to just how money came into existence. I would say currency, not money, but currency came into existence. Talking about in 1913, that's a very interesting year when the Federal Reserve was created. It was created really because it was a war on cash. That's exactly what it was. They wanted to remove actual physical money, which was, classified in the Constitution as the only thing that's actual legal tender is gold and silver rounds. Anything else, it's not necessarily deemed necessary or worthy. I'm probably just ad-libbing that a little bit, but when you think about why they set that up in 33, when not Nixon, but Roosevelt suspended the gold standard for the first time, then he unsuspended it back in 34, and then you travel down this timeline here. 1944, you got the first Bretton Woods Agreement, where all currencies around the world tied their currency to dollar because the dollar was really just as good as gold because it was backed by gold. Really, it was a gold certificate. And then you see that it's been a war every single time in turn or major event. There's always something shifting as far as in our monetary policy. And then in 71, Nixon actually ended that gold standard for good because, America was running a lot of budget deficits. They were in different wars, and a lot of countries around the world were starting to figure out, like, wait a minute, do they actually hold the amount of gold in their vaults compared to the amount of money they're printing? And so Nixon saw that. He said, "Oh, we got to actually we got to put a stop to this." And that's when the gold standard ended. It was only supposed to be temporary. But what happened was Henry Kissinger went over to the Saudis and struck a deal, which is now we say it's the 13 OPEC nations. Well, it was 12, but 13 now with Russia joining that. And so that's why oil is priced in dollars. And it was
So we basically tied our dollar to oil and took it off of gold, is what you're saying.
Took it off of gold. Exactly. Took it off of gold. But then now, as you see what's going on now, central banking, which is the federal government, gives governments the right to print money out of thin air with no real backing, no economic development, no backing as far as physical commodities. And so that's what's happening now. From the hegemony, we've been printing so much money now to where it's literally crashing the economies around the world, because as the world's reserve currency, that means every country holds dollars in their vaults because they have to transact. When they transact outside of their borders, they have to use dollars, like purchasing oil or different goods and services. They have to use it in dollars. And so they're seeing this and they're like, well, how do we correct the debt? The only way you can correct the debt is that you got to keep printing money, or there's got to be another shift, or you inflate it away, which that's going to turn in hyperinflation for the for us, of course, American people. But the only way they can do a reset and make it kind of somewhat make sense is starting moving into this digital world, this digital currency. And that brings us to, like you said, back in 2021, and you're talking about this new executive order. So it's kind of, I know you can speak a lot of life to that, which brings us to this point, this executive order that Biden actually called for, executive order 14067. And so
Yeah,
yeah.
and there wasn't a lot of media coverage on this, right? It was more of like I mean, I know there was a lot of executive orders signed during that time, but I feel like this kind of went under the radar, right? Like not a lot of people know that 2 years ago in July, almost 2 years ago, that an executive order was basically signed to move us towards a central bank digital currency, right? So we're looking at moving in that direction, and most Americans are pretty much unaware of that, right? I mean, I don't know if I know too many people that actually know that we're headed in that direction, unless you're really in the financial space.
Right, exactly.
That too. Everybody I asked, they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
Which
and
there's other nations that have done this, right? We're not the first one to consider moving to like a digital currency as like a main or a major part of our transactions that are happening. Correct?
That's correct. That's correct. There's other nations out there that are doing this. But one thing that I think what people are not paying attention to is that, yeah, they're doing it, but they're also leveraging the value of whatever this new currency they're backing it by gold or silver or other different commodities, other metals. That's what gold and silver is, the standard. So even though they're doing that, but they're backing these currencies by physical gold and silver. That's why you see a lot of central banks around the world. They're buying up tons of physical gold and silver, and they've been doing it for the last really 2 to 3 years.
So what's a little odd is you have what's called the BRICS nations, right? So you have the BRICS nations that are going around, they're gathering all these countries together and they're backing their currency with commodities, right? So they're saying, hey, you got oil here in Russia or in Saudi Arabia or whatever, and they're saying, hey, you're going to use that as a backing to the currency that we're all going to use together, right? But the US really isn't doing that.
No,
it's like they're sticking with this whole like, we will just keep printing out of thin air. We're not going to back it with anything. So does that worry you at all that you've got like all these foreign nations that are moving back towards an asset backed currency or a commodity backed currency versus the US that's really just not? We're I almost would say we're behind the times.
Yeah.
Rather than competing, we're just kind of stagnant with what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think absolutely it worries me more so because the majority of people aren't aware of this. And the majority of people, when those dollars come flowing back to our shores, that's when the effects are going to happen. But see, people think those effects, they're going to have some fair warning. Right now, this is the fair warning. Because we're seeing these different movements, we're seeing BRICS nations, we're seeing a formation of BRICS and Russia, China. You're seeing all these things happening. So it's like that is the warning. It's like the slow cook of a frog, but this is the slow cook right now, and no one's paying attention. And then what happens? The disaster happens when all of a sudden everything's set in place, and those dollars that have been outsourced, those dollars that have been used through other countries around the world, they're saying, well, guess what? We no longer have to use those dollars now. We can use anything we want, and we don't have to use USD. And I think that's when it's going to be a wake up call. But that announcement won't happen. They're not going to give people 6 months to prepare, because if they did that, they can't make this shift, because the banks, as we're seeing, they don't have support if everyone goes and starts pulling their money out of banks and start converting it into physical gold and silver. So what they do is when this disaster happens, it'll happen like on a Friday evening, and of course banks are closed. Most of them are closed Saturday. Well, there's the commercial banks that are open, but they don't open all day. But then of course Sunday they're closed, and then Monday here's the new standard. But most people won't even be aware of what's going on a Friday evening, because all they're thinking about is getting off of work,
Right.
getting home, and getting ready for the weekend. And they most likely won't even hear this news until Monday morning comes, and it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? That's when they're going to find out. But at that time, it's way too late. Then it's just this complete scramble and urgency of what are we going to do now? And I think that is the biggest thing to prepare people and really, really, really start paying attention to some of these signs, because when those dollars come flowing back, and the reason why it'll hit us the most, because everyone uses our dollars. We don't use the yuan to trade, but the yuan or China uses dollars to trade, and as well as any other country. So when all 90% of those dollars or 95% of those dollars flow back to the United States, and no, these countries no longer have to use the dollar, well, that's when we're going to see inflation rise like we've never seen before. And, of course, we'll still use our dollars as far as nationally, we use them. But then what does that new currency look like? What if it's like the IMF or SDR? Because it's easy for people to transact or convert into whatever this new reserve currency is going to be. And I think that's what people are not paying attention. Now, of course, the dust will settle over the years, but how many people can survive during that time frame? And then, of course, they're not going to tell you what the new exchange rates are going to be the first time they flip that switch. It's just, again, that slow cook strategy, and then people want to realize, wait a minute, 2 years down the road, my dollars don't stretch as much. What's going on here? Why are things so much more expensive? And 3 years comes by, and 4 years comes by, and it's like, well, it's checkmate. The only way I think we can even really begin to fight against that is have more control. And the more you have control, the more you don't use that system, the better off people are going to be. Because right now it is a voluntary act. It's like, okay, if we don't inform ourselves, if we don't educate the people around us, then the majority, as they say, the majority rules. So the majority of people just jump into this new system, then eventually it's just going to be the standard, just like anything else they enforce. So
Are they going to have a choice? I mean, like, what's the choice? What's the solution? What can we do? Like, what's our choices? Do we have any?
well, the choice right now is stacking as much physical gold and silver as you can, because it is real money. Because that's what the Constitution, of course, the Constitution says that, which I truly believe those principles and the established of the Constitution was based on some biblical principles. That's why, it is, we consider it this, we consider it God's money, but I think this gives us control.
Mm.
This just gives us complete control. And that's the only thing, because when it comes to just money in general, again, we can use this for barter. I mean, it's already 12, 13 states that actually accept gold and silver as legal tender. I think even
And growing. Yeah.
and growing. Texas actually they're electing to make gold and silver legal tender, or they're going back to that. So there's states that understand this, and they're going to accept gold and silver as payment. And if we know that, it's just start.
That's a good point, because I think I like what you talk about when you kind of say like the boiling water there. I think a lot of people are unaware, and it allows the kind of the wool to be pulled over their eyes. I mean, this potentially we're headed in a situation where a huge transfer of wealth is going to happen, just like it happened in 2008. There was all the people that weren't preparing who lost a ton of money, and that money went somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, did it go to the banks? Oh, it probably went to the wealthy, the ones that were prepared, and they became more wealthy, right? So it's like we're looking at a lot of Americans who aren't doing anything right now, but there are a few. Like there's a movement that's happening there that we're looking at outside countries, and they're saying, okay, well, they're buying up a ton of gold and silver. The wealthy are buying up a ton of gold and silver. It's like if you're not in the top 1%, you can still do that. But if we don't, then that puts those that aren't in the top 1% in a position where they're going to just lose more of their buying power, more of that ability to have wealth, and that's going to get transferred to those who are preparing, right? So I like that analogy, because that's really how it is. It's the uninformed lose their money, and the informed are the ones that usually gain during those opportunities. And we're really like right now, we're just we're in this, I would say like a tepid boil, right? Where like inflation is pretty much staying fairly stagnant,
Right.
but the ability for hyperinflation to happen because of so many foreign countries dropping the US dollar, and our interest rates have been going up, which is a part of that reason why they have.
Yep.
They're dropping the US dollar, which means now our money is going to stretch even less. You know, I don't know about you guys, but people always say like, oh, well, the cost of cars is going up, the cost of whatever gas is going up, but it's really not. It has to do with the fact that like there's too many dollars in existence, and our dollar is worth less than what it was. It's not even worth $1. It's worth 5 cents to what it was originally, right? So that's why everything is so expensive. So we're seeing the signs, and the signs are still there. Like maybe costs of a few things have gone down, but the potential to wake up tomorrow and cost of bread could be $1,000, you know, like it happened in Venezuela or Germany or, you know, Hungary, or, you know, like a lot of these foreign nations that it's happened to,
Right.
that are using it. So I know like we've got that executive order that's moving us towards this digital dollar, which kind of scares me in the fact that right now, if our government wants to print more dollars, right, they have to get approval, and then they have to actually print them. But if we move towards this digital dollar, they don't have to print any more dollars.
Right.
They're just going to add zeros onto the end of the electronic balance of our money, which is interesting. And I think people don't realize too that kind of ties in with the fact that the reason why they were hiring all these IRS agents is as we move to this central digital currency, it's going to give the government more insight into your transactions. Because right now, like when I hand cash to you for, you know, or to my lawnmower, the kid that comes mows my lawn, if I give him $10, $20, he's not paying taxes on that.
Right.
You know, that's an under the table transaction, right? So the government knows that they're missing tax dollars if they don't head in this direction. So there's a reason behind this. There's a reason to everything, right? So you follow the money, you kind of realize what that is. So we're going to have basically less privacy into the transactions that we have.
Right.
Now there will be some inefficiencies that we're dealing with that a lot of people don't realize. You know, like a lot of the foreign nations have this kind of like digital currency that's happening. Like I know the European Union, they're moving towards a digital currency. And now if you spend over $1,000 in cash, you can receive fines or prison time. So they're moving towards that, and that's coming to the US too. Like, and it's in China right now. In China, every purchase that happens is tracked. Every purchase. So every transaction. So if you are going to get on the train and you're going to go to protest at the government grounds in Washington, D.C. down the road, well, what if the government doesn't want to do that? Then they can just shut down your debit card or your credit card, right? So there's going to be that loss of privacy. There's going to be that full control of our currency that's coming in this direction. And that's why you're seeing like this attack on this cryptocurrency space. Like I've got money on Coinbase. I have money in Binance. Both of them have been in court fighting the SEC. That's like, hey, like we want to be able to regulate this. We know that there's a lot of tax dollars that we're missing that's happening there. And there's a lot of competing currencies that are happening right now that if we want to move towards this digital currency that we can't have that happening. So it's coming, and the rollout of that, right, which you mentioned, Celine, is happening in July, is where we're going to this FEDNOW, which honestly has some good things to it. It's an instant payment processor, right? So it's like right now the ACH, the automatic clearinghouse, as they're called, it sometimes can take a
Like a
minute,
couple days.
sometimes it can take days for a transaction to process, right? It's a very inefficient system. And a lot of foreign countries already have a more instantaneous, and that's really a lot of crypto does that too, where like like Ethereum was like, Ripple were designed to make those transactions happen way quicker. Well, the government wants that technology, right? So that's why they've been going after XRP and Ripple. That's why they're going after Coinbase and Binance. And that's why they're trying to take down the cryptocurrency industry, is because you can't have a competing digital dollar. There's literally a crypto that is the US dollar. And they can't have that competing crypto, right? So they've got to first attack the industry, then they're going to regulate it, then they're going to adopt it, right? They're going to adopt the technology that has already been created and move into that space. And that starts with FedNow, which comes out in July, right? So, and you can go and learn about some of this stuff on our growwealthclub.com. It's under knowledge, under the knowledge tab, where you can learn about the history of the dollar, how gold has stacked up over time, the executive order, and a little bit more about the FedNow payment processor. And I would just encourage you to just get educated on it, because the more educated you are, the more you kind of start seeing the big picture of what's happening with the push of the World Economic Forum to have people own nothing and be happy. That's literally their, I don't know if you call it a motto or what it is, but they don't hide that. They don't hide that fact. And they're governed by the CEO of BlackRock, who manages $10 trillion. There's only $40 trillion in existence. They manage 10 trillion of that. They have a lot of power. Yeah. And if you look it up, they own every business, just about every business out there. Every major company out there is owned by BlackRock. And he has stated that this is what he wants.
Yeah.
He wants you to own nothing. He wants you to get used to having smaller backyards, smaller houses, living on less, not having abundance, not being used to the idea of not owning anything, and just be reliant on them, really, for providing for your needs, because that gives them full control.
That is, if you think about that, that's like, you think from the war on cash to 1933 to 44 to 71 to 299 to 2008. As you start to see the timeline, it's like it's all orchestrated. And then you hear this Charles Schwab talk about you own nothing and you will love it. And it's like they're trying to orchestrate that to where they're trying to remove the thought of, like you said there, like abundance, growth, and being able to have, your own, you control your own economy. Really, you have your land, or you have your homes, and you can grow stuff and you can basically sustain yourself. So if they know they're getting ready to crash this, it's almost like it's done purposely. They're getting ready to make this shift. Well, people know I'm worth $10 million or whatever it is, whatever dollar amount, and they know this shift happens. My 10 million turns into 5 million or 1 million. There's going to be a lot of upset people. So how do you control that? Well, we're going to give you a universal life or a universal income. We're going to set a standard on what you can buy and how much you can buy. And the only way we can track this is by going to FedNow.
Wow.
Is that a conspiracy theory? You know, because a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is a conspiracy theory," but it's right on their website, right? Like
It's right on their way. It's
they
right
don't
on
hide any of this. This isn't like the powers that be. If you go and you look it up, you can see that like the person in control, because it's not our government isn't in control. It's the people with the money and the power
Yeah.
that control everybody. So is this really a conspiracy theory, or is this like legit? Like, because that's, I think a lot of people may hear that and they're like, oh my gosh, this is never going to happen. Like, this is not, you guys are just blowing smoke, right? But is that really, I mean, if you go onto their website, can you read on this? Is it all apparent right there?
It's all apparent, and
So
it's
it's none
right.
of it's hidden like
Not
it
hidden.
was
I
in the
think,
past, right? Now they're coming
yeah,
out and they're completely open about it because they know that they're already on that trajectory and there's
right.
really not a ton that can stop it at this point.
No, it's like it's here, and the only thing that we can do is that we have to gain as much traction as far as control. We have to get as much of that controlled traction back in our hands. And I think a lot of people aren't paying attention because it's not mainstream media, which of course I don't understand how this is not mainstream media. But of course, like you said, they don't. It's like pulling a veil over their face so people don't know. Like if you do your research and you go to these sites, like you said, it's right there. It's right there in plain day, but it's not going to be the first thing that comes up when you Google. You're going to have to go dig, and they absolutely play on the fact that people will not do the research, that they'll just depend on the government to kind of take care of them, and everything's going to be okay because, hey, we're America, which Americans, we're a little arrogant. I think we're a little arrogant when it comes to that because happy days have been here all the time and that never happened. So um, I don't think this is not a time to play. It's definitely not, especially when you got some of these powers that be that are putting this information out there. They're blatantly saying what they're going to do. And it's still kind of up to us to make a decision. Are we just going to follow along like cattle, or are we going to know that we have the posture and we do have a solution? And this is the solution if people want to really, really start to prepare themselves. That's really what it comes down to. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people don't realize that this has been going for a long time. Like that's why you don't learn about financial education in school. You know, because that's what keeps us as a credit-based society and not an asset-based. You know, if we all bought assets, there would be no need for the banks.
it would be no
There
need.
would be no need for credit.
Exactly.
It would completely tumble the entire setup of what they have going.
Right.
So that all comes crumbling down because for every dollar that you put in the bank, they go out and lend $7. Well,
Yeah.
there's not $8 that have been printed. So they're reliant on us borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and not actually having financial literacy. Which I think is, you know, if you just ask yourself that question, why didn't I learn financial education in school? You know, why didn't I learn about self-sufficiency? Why didn't I, you know, like, why do I not learn about how to be healthy? You know, why is all of our food fake?
Yeah.
You know, like
Oh,
it's
gosh.
all so that we have this dependency. You're almost a slave and you don't realize it.
It's
You're a slave to the system, right?
so true. It's like slavery switched over. You
Like,
exactly are. You're a slave to the system, and it just completely because you think about the country was split all the way across the country, the Northerners and the Southerners, and if you go back, before the Civil War started, they didn't really want to end slavery, but because the Civil War happened, they just compromised, and then that's when the Jim Crow laws came out. But they really compromised. Really, they just kind of okay, we'll compromise for the moment, but now they switched it over to they created now I think it was all orchestrated. They created the IRS in 1912, and then in 1913 the Federal Reserve came out. you
Yeah.
know, so it's like,
When I find it strange too, like, so if you go back to like my grandpa's generation, there was definitely some racism there, but I feel like that started to subside. Like I don't remember
yeah,
growing up and seeing race, but now I see that it coming back full swing,
Yeah.
which is kind
it's
of
almost like they're
strange to
doing it
me,
on
where it's
purpose.
like there's this division now again
Right.
that I'm like, how did that happen? I thought we had like made all these
Yeah.
strides when it comes to that, but now it's like, okay, well, divided, we're easily conquerable, right?
Yes.
Whereas united, we're not. So I feel like
Exactly.
that's what's really happening right now. It's like it's this like black versus white, Republican versus Democrat. Like it's creating like these huge gaps
Exactly.
in this, so we're not unified. And if obviously if we're not unified, you know, it makes us weaker towards the fact that the reason why we have 50 states is that we're supposed to have power as the people,
Right.
so that the government can't dictate exactly how our lives are supposed to go. Like the whole purpose was for us to be in charge of our own laws and governments. But man, you look that up and you'll realize like it doesn't matter what the people want.
It
The
doesn't.
stuff that gets passed is like,
Uh,
right, you know, like mostly corporations, mostly just those in power pass whatever they feel like, and it's not necessarily what we want, you know. So it's, I feel
it's
like that's all kind of tied together in the
yeah,
fact that like, you know, if we're not united,
yeah. And even
we're
think about even when slavery ended, like a lot of the slaves went back to their slave masters and they asked for jobs because they some of them treated their slaves bad, but even talk about Washington and some of the early, because they had plantations, but they were taken care of. So it was all harmony. Like they babysitted the slave masters, you know, babies, and and even like I mean, some of them have relations with their daughters. So it's like they were all one big happy family in a sense.
most people don't know that though, right? I
No, a lot
mean,
of people don't.
you
That's
don't
what I'm
get
saying.
educated like that in school
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, a
It's
lot of people don't know that, and they think about it. They actually went back. They said, "Well, this is all we know. We're going to come back." And a lot of them, that's why they were taught how to read, and they were taking care of the land. And then, of course, now it wasn't just providing housing. They got what 5 cents a day or as minimum wage or whatever it was. Now they
Now
had
they're
to.
employees. Now
Yeah,
they're
now they're
employees.
employees, but again, see, that was like C said. Now they're employees, so they switched the system over to okay, well, they're still going to work for us, and then now it's widespread now. Now, okay, the whole country abolished it, but we just switched over to now we're just give them a little bit of wage.
all right. Quick question, survey. Would you rather be an employee or would you rather have your own business?
Have my own business.
Business.
Right? Everybody, we all say that, right?
Yeah.
It's still crazy how many people think that like the safer route is the employee route.
Exactly, and I think
You
that's
know,
that
I think
slavery.
if I asked everybody if you've been laid off, probably just about everybody would say yes.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't really that secure. Or if they jump from job to job in order to
Yeah.
make more income, they don't
Right,
realize that you can do the same thing with being self-employed, right?
exactly.
Right. That's awesome. That's so true.
Yeah,
Oh, good talk, you guys. This was
this is good. Yeah, that's
very good. I'm gonna have to get some more questions too. This was great though. So anybody who liked this, just go below and subscribe and hit that little bell below so that you can keep listening to our cool content. We look forward to seeing you guys again. Wealth and Health signing off. And hey, let's go and create our own economy. All right, you guys. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.